What's up, everybody? Happy Friday to you, and welcome to Lombardi Time Brews, where I'm your host, John Delray. Today, we are diving into the Packers superlatives. That's right, predicting who is going to be the team MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, Most Improved, etc., etc., etc. I've got 11 different categories, I think, of awards that I have put down a prediction as to which Green Bay Packer is going to fill that award for the Packers this year. Now, I know. If you watched yesterday's video, I said that today was going to be the concerns list, but actually, because that's kind of like a two-part thing where I want to express the concerns about the current state of the roster, as well as what's going to go well with the roster, I decided I actually want to do that next week. And that'll actually push itself really well then right into our first game preview of the year. Finally, as we look forward to the week one matchup against the Chicago Bears. Also, besides that, on Monday, on Labor Day, right around dinner time, I'm going to hop on and go live for a little bit. We'll do a Q&A. We'll hang out for a little while if you're available. Around dinner time on Monday, I'll put out details as we get closer. So without anything else, just two pieces of news for you. I did talk about Tree Carpenter and John Ford. Both had gotten cut from the 53, as we knew, where they were going to come back to the practice squad. Well, the answer is yes and no. So John Ford is retained on the practice squad. They released James Empey, the center, off of the practice squad. However, Tree Carpenter, after being released by the Packers, decided to go sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers practice squad. So Tree Carpenter no longer a part of the Packers organization. So that's really the only news of the day, which means time to talk about this stuff. So I'm going to start with the big award, right? The team MVP. Traditionally a quarterback award, but certainly if not quarterback, then offense at the very least. And I actually decided for this one, let's stick with offense. Jordan Love probably going to have a relatively up and down year. Maybe he's going to be the biggest star of the team, or certainly most talked about player at the very least. But in terms of true team MVP, I'm going to go with Showtime Aaron Jones. We all know Jones is getting older, but he can still produce at the highest of levels. One of the best running backs in the NFL. Certainly a top 10 running back in the NFL. If you caught my video like a month ago when I was detailing why he absolutely should be considered amongst the top 10. But it goes beyond that for Aaron Jones. Matt LaFleur has talked several times about how Aaron Jones has stepped into the void of leadership that now exists on the team. That Aaron Rodgers is gone, Mercedes Lewis is gone, Randall Cobb is gone. They needed new guys to step into a more vocal role, and Aaron Jones has done such. Brian Gutekunst at his last press conference talked about Aaron Jones being the heart and soul of the Green Bay Packers. His contributions to this team go far beyond the field. And he still happens to be one of the best players on the field who the entire offense is molded around. So is he going to have the greatest statistical output of his career? I don't know. Is he going to be an all-pro Pro Bowl? I don't know. But I do feel confident saying that his place of value on this team this year is one of great, great importance. Offensive Rookie of the Year. So jumping over to the rookies now, there's a lot of contenders offensively, right? I mean, Tucker Kraft, Jaden Reed, Luke Musgrave, like there's potential for stats here from some of the rookies. But the one that I went with happened to be tight end Luke Musgrave. He and Love started out camp having a lot of misconnections, but that only lasted a couple weeks because by the end of camp, by the end of preseason, whether Love was force-feeding it to Musgrave intentionally or not, doesn't really matter. Musgrave and Love were on the field almost always together, and that meant high target share for Luke Musgrave. Pair that with his athletic traits, and I really think the Packers are going to make a concerted effort to involve their new tight end one for all intents and purposes. I think they're going to get him the ball, scheme things just for him. And that means that he's going to be putting up numbers. Now, Jaden Reed, by all means, could be an explosive slot receiver. May wind up being the punt returner on the team, too. He's going to get the ball in his hands. But Luke Musgrave is going to have a different kind of impact, one that we haven't seen in Green Bay for a very long time. One of an athletic, receiving tight end. And I do think he has the potential to put up bona fide stats in year one for the Green Bay Packers, making him the offensive rookie of the year. Defensive rookie of the year. Here, again, you got candidates, and that's kind of the case when a team has 11 draft picks on their team, not to mention the 3 UDFAs who also made the roster. But defensively, you've got first-round pick Lucas Van Ness, Carl Brooks, Kobe Wooden, Carrington Valentine. That's just on the defensive side of the ball, right? So when I had to go over a rookie of the year defensively, it was going to have to be someone who's going to play, right? We know Brooks, Wooden, they're probably going to be part of the rotation on the defensive line. Gutekunst and LaFleur have said as much. Lucas Van Ness, number 3, maybe 4, maybe 5, depending on the situation, edge rusher on the team. And we know that he was picked as more of a developmental prospect, just like Rashawn Gary, not so long ago. So then you got Carrington Valentine, too. And Valentine, he had a great preseason, did great work in camp. Sure, he was over-aggressive at times, certainly. But he looked much more the part than a 7th rounder. I even saw Aaron Nagler of Cheesehead TV talk about, because, he was covering even back then, talking about how Donald Driver walked into the offense and immediately looked different than your typical 7th round pick, and how Carrington Valentine carries himself much the same way as a 7th rounder. So lots to consider here for Defensive Rookie of the Year, but at the end of the day, who may play the steadiest? Well, honestly, with Stokes still being out and only 4 corners on the team, Nixon playing slot only, Valentine trying to learn slot as well as boundary, all it's going to take is one cornerback injury for Carrington Valentine to get substantial playing time. So I'm going to go with him as my Defensive Rookie of the Year. Because when Valentine plays, he is going to create some highlights. There may be some downers too, but he's going to create highlights. There's no doubt about that. Brooks and Wooden going to be heavily parts of rotations. Lucas Van Ness probably will have a number of impressive plays, especially just physical ones, right? Bull rushes somebody. I'm anticipating seeing that. But is it going to be consistent enough that you really look at him as the most impactful defensive rookie right now? Maybe longest term, he'll have the best career. But it kind of feels like Valentine's the guy right now, if there's an injury to a cornerback on the roster. Now let's take a look at just overall players of the year, offensive and defense. Offense, Christian Watson, easy choice. If A.J. Dillon truly lives up to his potential, maybe he could be an offensive player of the year. Or let's look at the line. Maybe we want to reward the offensive line. David Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, Zach Tom, who's certainly continuing his ascension up the NFL offensive line ranks. But I actually want to go in a different direction here. I've talked before extensively about how Christian Watson and Jordan Love seemingly through camp had like this boom or bust relationship. They were either very on, or it would be kind of a bunch of plays in a row that just weren't quite together. And we saw that in the preseason matchups too. I mean, think of even the deep ball against Seattle, where, as has been pointed out by the QB school, JT O'Sullivan, I think Kurt Warner did a breakdown of it as well, that Watson and Love just weren't perfectly synced up. The deep ball wasn't great, nor was the route. Watson probably made the throw look a little bit worse than it was, but Love didn't exactly help Watson. That's happened a lot. But the player that didn't happen as much with is my Offensive Player of the Year pick, and that is Romeo Doubs. Christian Watson may put up more highlights, but I'm willing to bet that we live in a universe where Romeo Doubs may end the year with more catches and more yards than Christian Watson. It's entirely possible. And if you would have said that 6 months ago, I think a lot of people would have thought it insane. But if he can stay healthy, which admittedly is a question mark right now, given his hamstring injury, and if Love and Watson continue where they're kind of at, obviously you hope for better, but if they continue where they're at, then I think we could see a lot of boom or bust with Love and Watson. Certainly a lot of quick slants for 15 yards or 60-yard touchdowns, but then also your fair share of struggles too. But then on the flip side, Doubs, just down in, down out, a reliable presence. So let's go with Offensive Player of the Year being Romeo Doubs. Defensive Player of the Year, who is the best player on that defense? Let's go with one of the hearts and soul of the defense, and let's go with Jair Alexander. Seriously weighed him for team MVP, but ultimately had to give that one to Jones. More intangibles, I guess you could say, but giving it to Jair on the defensive side of the ball obviously feels like the right move. Yes, you've got your certain number of defensive stars over there, no doubt, right? You've got Kenny Clark, you've got Rashawn Gary coming back, Devondre Campbell hopefully rounding into form, etc., etc. The defense is not empty of stars. Perhaps the largest of them, though, is Jair. And he's been constantly revered all offseason long as one of the top cover corners in the NFL. Per PFF grading, per advanced stats, it's all out there. And he just needs to continue to live up to that. And I think this year, because one of the only knocks on him last year was just every so often there would be a play that just lapsed somehow. Maybe it's because of the differences in opinion between Joe Barry and Jerry Gray. I do believe that there was a lot more to that than has ever been talked about. But still, I think a great year is coming for Jay Alexander, and I think he's your defensive player of the year. Comeback player of the year, kind of an easy choice for me. Maybe Eric Stokes, maybe others. There were quite a few injuries last year, but coming back this year, let's just go with Rashawn Gary, right? Coming back from an ACL, coming back incredibly quickly from an ACL. Week 9, he tore it last year, and all of a sudden he's back. Probably going to be on a pitch count for the first couple weeks of the year, but so week 9 to coming back week 1 with an ACL. And if you've watched him in camp, if you've seen him thus far, he is moving well. All that power is still there. And I am expecting a massive year for Rashawn Gary. Even today, the Packers put out a question of the day as they were getting ready for practice, as they do now on their social channels. And they asked players to say, what is their favorite career highlight? Rashawn made mention of don't play anything from last year. He feels as though his play wasn't exactly up to snuff last year. And he was still on a pretty tremendous trajectory when he went down in week 9. So, Rashawn Gary, comeback player of the year. Most improved player of the year. Someone who has received a fair amount of playing time in the past, but never has necessarily been handed the amount of snaps, the amount of playing time that they're certain to receive this year. And someone whose ability is going to rise to the occasion and match the playing time promotion that they're due to receive. I'm going to go with TJ Slaton. Slaton had a little bit of a slower start to camp, certainly wasn't anything bad, but most of the headlines early on were all about Devontae Wyatt and his physical prowess. And it's possible he actually is going to be most improved, but towards the end of camp, Wyatt seemed to take a little bit of a step back, while TJ Slaton took a large step forward. Especially in the run department, which we all know is where we're really hoping TJ Slaton makes a dramatic impact along the defensive line. So let's go with TJ Slaton now. And I should note as well, because I'm not sure that this got talked about enough, when the Packers went with just 2 interior defensive linemen, IDLs, different times at camp, it was Wyatt and Clark. Or, Clark was almost always out there, but they would switch up who was with him. Towards the end of camp, it almost always was TJ Slaton and Kenny Clark. And if you're just more the big-bodied run defender, you're not often in on those packages. TJ is. And it might make for a big year for TJ Slaton. Others, like I said, that I thought about. Most improved, you could talk Zach Tom. You could talk Darnell Savage if you believe he's going to have a bounce-back year. How about Josiah DeGuara now that he probably is going to get more playing time than he's ever had, even though he didn't have the greatest camp? Still, though, for me, TJ Slaton could be your most improved Green Bay Packer. Bounce back. Who's going to get the bounce back award? This is a player who previously in their career has achieved great heights and then didn't necessarily achieve as much of the heights last year, and yet someone who is poised to return to said heights this year. And in that regard, I got to go with Devondre Campbell. Look, yeah, we all know the deal. Not so much a journeyman, but certainly well-traveled earlier in his career before coming to Green Bay. All of a sudden, 2 years ago, becomes one of the best inside linebackers in the NFL, winds up getting an first-team All-Pro nod at inside linebacker, and then last year was plagued by a number of injuries. If you go look on Twitter, he's not quiet about the injuries that he suffered last year. And the stats bear it out. I mean, he just wasn't the same guy. You could see it even just watching the games. Not as much quickness, not as much tenacity, not as much swarming to the ball as we had seen. But according to him, a lot of it was injury-related. And he now feels, until his most recent ankle injury, so let's just assume coming back to full health soon enough, right? But then, his missed tackle rate, if that can come back down like it was 2 years ago, he could be in for a big year again. Also, if you haven't seen it yet, go check out on Twitter. Brian Baldinger of ESPN, he put out this really cool clip about the Green Bay Packers swarming to tackle. We've called for it for years, right? Fans know. Whenever the Packers played the Niners, whenever they've played really good defenses, It's like anytime a Packer had the ball, they were just immediately surrounded by everyone on the defensive side, right? And then brought down. And then when the Packers would be on defense, it wasn't like that. And to me, that's one of the easiest things possible to fix in football. That's an effort problem. That's a coaching problem. And yet we haven't seen it for years. Be it Mike Pettin, be it the earlier years of Joe Barry that we've seen. It hasn't been a thing that recently in Green Bay. But Brian Baldinger, in his breakdown on Twitter, highlighted a play from the Seattle game that saw all of the Green Bay defense swarm. And I put out on Twitter in response to that saying, if they really do that, if they use their level of athleticism and they fix that problem, which is so fixable, then truly this defense can be really exciting this year. And Devondre Campbell is a huge part of that. If he and Quay Walker swarm together, surround the ball carriers, this could be a massive year again for Devondre Campbell. Now, your surprise performer. Who's a guy who maybe is a little bit far down the depth chart, who still is going to make a bunch of plays that make us sit back and go, ooh, good job. I think that's going to be Carl Brooks. Yeah, I mean, people forget. Carl Brooks wasn't just a pass rusher extraordinaire in college. In fact, when it came to edge players collegiately, he was one of the top run defense graded players by PFF last year. He's not a one-trick pony. And yeah, I've noted, like, even though his weight is listed at about 300 pounds, looking at him, he looks small for a defensive lineman, yet it didn't stop him all camp. Constantly in the backfield against his own teammates, and in preseason games, making a number of impact plays, both against the run and against the pass. I'm not pretending as though all of a sudden he's going to become a starter, that he's going to upend Wyatt or Slayton, but he certainly is going to be a part of the rotation. And I think there's going to be a number of times this year where we look at him and go, Goody got a steal in Carl Brooks. Two more, let's go with an unsung hero. For me, and it's been this way the last couple of years, John Runyon Jr. Yeah, right guard. Guy can also play center, kind of, when they give him those snaps. And apparently he's like their emergency plan at center right now if both Josh Myers and Zach Tom go down. But John Runyon Jr. just doesn't seem to get enough credit for how good of a guard he's become. A couple years ago, he played penalty-free football like all season long. And then last year, he still was one of the best pass-blocking guards in football. Yet no one really talks about him that way. Could he improve in terms of his physicality in run blocking? Yeah, absolutely he could. But for being a former day 3 draft pick who has become a steady, unquestioned starter, and someone who across the preseason, again, was one of the best pass-blocking guards in the NFL, he deserves a lot more credit than he receives for his contributions to the offensive line. And then last one, who's going to be the new crowd favorite, right? Who's going to become that hometown hero? We've known about him all through the years, right? John Kuhn was one of them for years. Jordy Nelson for years. There always seems to be people that are players that the general crowd just clings on to. That whenever they get the ball, it's a little extra cheer, or enough of our fathers sitting there going, I like him. To me, that this year is Jayden Reed. Second round pick. Yeah, you got high expectations for the guy, right? But the way that Jayden Reed plays football, I think, is going to make a lot of people very, very happy. As my friends at Wisco Fanatics say, all the man does is score touchdowns. And I think with Jayden Reed, his play style, his certain level of scrappiness in spite of being a smaller individual, I think that's going to endear himself to a lot of fans. As I wrap up the awards or the superlatives, I did just want to say one other thing. And I know it's been something that's been kind of talked about, but I feel the need to address it again. This is the last week, really, of the offseason. When we hit Monday, when we hit Labor Day, it is officially week 1. And then we're doing game previews. We're doing concerns about the roster, strengths of the roster, etc. Now that the roster's finally in its final form. And I guess I would just say this. Looking ahead to the Green Bay Packers season, a few things seem very apparent, and that is the air has been lifted around this team. Listen to even national media personalities talk about the vibes coming from Green Bay right now. Or even listen to Kyle Brandt on Good Morning Football when he talked about whether you're from Eau Claire or from Sheboygan or whatever, what have you. Aaron Rodgers was incredible, but he's a star. And he brings with him a star personality. Jordan Love just wants to play football, at least at this point. And that's refreshing for a number of Packer fans. Let's even look at Kenny Clark, who appeared on Lombardi's Bar, a fellow podcast, last night or the night before. But Kenny Clark did an appearance on that show, and when they asked Kenny if he's looking forward, Kenny said it's been a minute since he was this excited to play in a Packers season. And think about it, just kind of how messed up that is, right? Like last year, monetarily, they were all in. Like they were primed for another Super Bowl run. Year before that, they were heavy Super Bowl contenders. This is a team that's getting off of a stretch of what, 3 years of being bona fide, unquestioned Super Bowl contenders year in and year out. And yet, this is the year that he's most excited for? To me, that's incredibly revealing. That as good as the team has been over the last couple of years, it maybe wasn't the most fun to be on. And now, looks like they're having fun again. I'm not saying it's going to be a super season. I'm not saying anything like that. But I am saying this is going to be a fun one. Glad you're along for the ride. Thanks for checking out Lombardi Time Brews. I hope you have an excellent weekend. Like I said, I'll be going live on Monday on Labor Day. Let's hang out for a little bit. Just do a quick Q&A for whoever can venture over to the channel. And then next week is going to be packed with stuff. Concerns about the roster, hopes for the roster, game preview for Packers versus Bears, etc., etc. We got lots of stuff to do. So have an absolutely wonderful weekend. Thanks for joining me here on Lombardi Time Brews. And as always, go Pack Go.